Hi, my name is Julia Cantaldo and welcome to WELLROOM. Today, we are discussing yet another rating system called Kaufman Protocol. It will be different from our previous conversations because Kaufman Protocol was developed to evaluate not building or infrastructure, but vitamins and supplements. Sounds strange? Yes. And my biggest question is, could this protocol be also applied to the space we're living in? To answer these questions, we invited the author of the Kaufman Protocol and our special guest today, Dr. Sandra Kaufmann. Sandra Kaufmann is a chief pediatric anesthesiologist and joined DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Hollywood, Florida. Dr. Kaufmann obtained her MD at the University of Maryland School of Medicine and also holds a master's in tropical ecology and evolutionary biology with a focus on cellular biology from the University of Connecticut. Dr. Kaufmann is also an anti-aging expert and the author of two books, Kaufman Protocol, Why We Age and How to Stop It, and Kaufman Protocol, Aging Solutions, which are considered groundbreaking work among biohackers and anti-aging enthusiasts. And I personally did read both books. I love them. I think if you're confused about age reversal and life extension and want to hear it from the experts, those are your guides. And they're available on Amazon. I will leave a link in the comment box below. And also, I will leave a link to Sandra's website where you can contact her directly and you can even schedule a consultation with her if you like. And in her spare time, Dr. Sandra Kaufmann enjoys running, swimming, and rock climbing. But today, she gracefully agreed to be interviewed right here on WellRoom. Hi, Sandra. Hi, Sandra. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it is my absolute honor. We've been trying to do this for a while, and I know there have been a few blips, but I'm so glad we finally get to do this.
Yes, thank you so much. And please tell us more about your background and how did you get into the field of longevity and anti-aging?
Good questions. So I was a cell biologist once upon a time. I was actually a tropical ecologist, was sort of entertaining. I got to tromp through jungles and look for plants that were interesting. But I spent most of my time actually looking at cells under microscopes. So I became a bit of a cell physiologist. I realized at some point in that path that cells don't have money and I was going to be broke. So as per encouragement from my father, I went to med school. So I spent 20 some years being a clinical anesthesiologist, specifically pediatric anesthesiologist. But I'm also a bit of an outdoor enthusiast. I climb mountains, I soar cliffs, that sort of thing. And somewhere about 10 years ago, I decided that I was going to take everything that I know and figure out how to not get older. Because getting older is miserable. And clearly we get older because our cells get older. And I thought, you know what? Everyone is endowed with certain gifts. I'm not 7 feet tall. I'm not an Olympian. But man, I have a good brain. I thought I was going to use it to sort of figure out like how all of this worked and do my best to untangle it. So that's where we are.
Yeah, that's a big undertake. Um, your books not only describe the benefits of individual supplements, but propose a comprehensive system that combines all the supplements into one protocol, Kaufman Protocol. Uh, why do you believe we need such an organization to supplements?
Oh, another good question. So when I jumped into trying to figure out all of why we age, it was abundantly clear that it's not one thing. It's not
Mhm.
even three things. It's a myriad collection of like a gazillion things. And when I was sort of like so I read a lot of benchwork articles, and it was like this particular thing in the cell falls apart, and that does, and this does, and I thought this is a little bit like nuts. And so some people were talking about the hallmarks of aging, although that was a brand new random thing I found in some article at the time. No one was really talking about anything. There was no longevity medicine or anti-aging. But I thought, you know what? I'm also really good at organizing stuff. So I decided to make 7 piles, like how like the different ideas on Post-it notes. And I kept going, well, this idea kind of matches that idea. So it got sort of like, 1,000 Post-it notes became 7 piles. Could have been more, but like 7 seems like a good number, right? So people will argue, well, maybe some of my subcategories aren't exactly the way they would have put them there, but they seem to make sense to me. So I decided that you age in 7 different categories, and that has to do with cellular organization. And you sort of have to fix all of them or a lot of them, depending on how aggressive you want to be, right? And then you look at the agents, or how do you do that? And it also became abundantly clear that some agents did one thing, some agents did 3 things, some agents did 5 things, but maybe not as well. And so in order to hit all of the 7 tenets of aging, you had to come up with a comprehensive plan to sort of like hit all of them as well as you could. So I became protocolizing of all of these things, right? So if I look at a person, I go, you're aging for these 7 reasons, but just for you, maybe, tenet 7 and tenet 2 are more important based on your genetics, your family history, your habits, whatever it is, right? So then I point scored all of the supplements, and I'm up to 50 or 60 of them by now. So it's over the counters as well as pharmaceuticals, numericalize the whole thing on a rating system to determine exactly how well they did things in each category. So now if someone does, wants to maximize a particular aspect of cellular aging, I go, aha, these 7 things are really good at that. Let's pick and choose from that pile. So the algorithm is all about identifying particular cellular failures and then pinpointing them and creating, number 1, protocols that'll be good for anybody at different ages. And then 2, how can we personalize it? Because we all know that we're all very different. So that's sort of like the idea of the protocol.
Well, you started as a cellular biologist, right? And then you went through traditional medical school. And as we all know, in traditional medical school, medical doctors study organs and systems, and they don't really study cells to that extent. But your protocol is not organized around, let's say, heart disease or brain disease or skin. It's all focused on your cellular approach, which is not exactly traditional medical school would teach you to do. Like, why did you choose to go with organization about the cells, not the organs?
Oh, I did it because I did have a background in cell biology.
Mhm.
And if you look at cells like a kidney cell versus a liver cell versus a brain cell, yeah, they're very different. But at the very heart of it, they have very similar problems, right? So I looked at the cell as like a factory. And what does a factory produce? Because the different proteins are basically what makes things different, right?
Mhm.
Brain cell clearly puts out different products than a kidney, liver, or whatever, whatever, whatever. Or like the other thing you can think about is like a car, right? A Lexus is clearly different than a Kia or like, electric car versus this. But at the root of it, if you break a tire, doesn't matter what kind of car you're driving, you're hosed, right? So the idea of a cell versus an organ is let's start at the basic essential architecture of cells and then work on specifics of where they go. And in fact, one of my tenets has to do with individual cell needs, meaning usually all the tenets assume that all cells are the same, but in this one category, I say, you know what, we really know that they're not. So what specific things do we need to address for the specifics? Right. And the biggest sort of way to, or the easiest way to understand that is to look at a senescent cell versus a stem cell. Clearly a stem cell we want to keep, we want to nourish, we want to like treat them with like, very special conditions. What exactly do they need to be optimized versus a senescent cell? God, we want to get rid of them. We need to eradicate those little bastards, right? So, and in the same way, a red cell that's wandering around your circulation, taking a lot of oxidative hits, is going to have a lot of different stresses than a liver cell that is simply sort of a machine to detox your body. So we can address those individual needs, but it's after we look at general cellular optimization. And I know I'm rambling here, but you are spot on in that Western medicine is very different. Or you learn organ systems, and when you go through med school, you get the idea that, oh my God, there's no connection between them at all. But the more you think about it, of course there is, right? I mean, there's absolutely true. And the other way that this sort of differentiates from Western medicine is that we are all trained to, people go about their merry way, right? And you wait for a disease to occur, right? You can either pick it up early or late based on sort of how you were electing to test for something. But we wait for a disease and we go, oh, darn, that's unfortunate. And then we treat it to the best of our ability, and then you go on your happy way. right? That's tradition. In longevity medicine, we go, well, we know that, X number of people are going to get this type of cancer or diabetes or high blood pressure. Why? Because people are getting older and bad things happen. It's just the normal pathway of life. So what can we do to avoid getting those things? Right. So not only are we
Prevent,
right? No,
prevent.
it's prophylactic. It's
Yeah.
absolutely a prophylactic point of view. And people go, well, that's ridiculous. How do you know it works? Well, in any one person, you don't, right? I don't know if I'm going to get brain cancer. And if I never get brain cancer, was I going to in the first place? I have no way of knowing that. But ultimately, we'll get enough people on protocols where you get population studies and you say, aha, yes, we did have a such and such percentage drop in heart disease or kidney disease or brain disorders or whatever it is. But by prophylaxing and optimizing cells, you're reducing relative risk of all disease, essentially. And then by default, increasing health span, you're going to improve lifespan. So that's sort of the plan. I mean, granted, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow and there's nothing I can do to
Well,
help you.
that doesn't count.
All right. You may heal better, assuming you don't die. But, so that's sort of like the general perspective that I undertake anyway.
Okay, well, let's go a little deeper into the tenant and start with tenant one. So it's DNA information. What does it mean? What do you encompass in that?
Oh, good question. Good question. So DNA holds all of the information of everything we need in our bodies, right? And what's really wacky, and I love this, is that the DNA is exactly the same in your skin cell versus your liver cell versus like wherever. But the epigenetics of it tells your cell like, okay, now's a really good time to make this protein or that or the other, right? So that gets us to the problem number one in DNA is that the epigenetics changes over time. In a sense, it's good, right? Epigenetics is, again, what determines what a cell is going to do. And it also says, you're going to be a baby, a toddler, a teenager, like, Lord forbid that lasts that long, and then an adult, right? But we love to turn off the epigenetic changes at that stage so that we stay like a normal, healthy adult rather than being like old and crappy. So we want to protect our epigenetics. That's thing number one. Two, of course, is telomere shortening, right? It's the ends of your telomeres. They get shorter with replicative stress. I always argue oxidative stress and glycation stress as well, but it's sort of like less talked about. But there's obviously, a direct correlation between length of life, morbidity, mortality with your telomeres. So that's something we want to take care of. And then the other thing I throw into this category, which is a little bit new, is the way your DNA is compacted in your nucleus. If it's super tight, it's called heterochromatin. And if it's sort of like loose and mushy, it's called euchromatin. And it just has to do with what pieces of information in each cell is more available to be used. And as you get older, that changes, and stuff that's been locked away in your heterochromatin, the tighter stuff that shouldn't be getting out, kind of escapes. And that just wreaks havoc on your body, leads to disease and cancer and that sort of thing. But again, there are ways to fix all of this. But those are the three things that I sort of basically focus on in the DNA category.
Is there a way to test? Like I have all this epigenetic test. I have this one and I have this one, and I know there's a lot more on the market. Do you have favorite ones? Or like, let's say if I go and start taking some supplements and I want to see the progress before and after, because I can't really make a judgment just looking at myself. How would you recommend to track the progress on that?
Very good question. So epigenetic tests are really interesting. There's so many good companies out there. I don't have an association with any of them.
Yeah, I am either.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
just going to unbox
I
this.
do like True Diagnostics.
Mhm.
They continuously all improve. Like once upon a time, Steve Horvath invented the first epigenetic clock test. It was looking at like 288 sites on your DNA, right? Since then, now we're looking at gazillions. It's a very specific number, gazillion. But the more specific you get, sort of like the more information you have. The problem is that it's an interpretation of your epigenetic changes. Some of them are clearly good. Some of them are very normal. Other ones are not so normal. We are still trying to figure out exactly what those mean. And these companies will send you these beautiful layouts saying, you're 62% this and 74% that. And honestly, that is just an educated guess as to how well you're doing. The key to epigenetics is to just know what's good for you epigenetically and know what's bad for you epigenetically and sort of follow that. Is it traceable with tests? That is kind of yes, but not really. Like it's not like a hemoglobin level where you can say, I'm 6.7 today and 9.4 tomorrow. Like it just doesn't work that way. But it does give you an indication, and people do love numbers. Right? I'm not so big on the numbers. I just go, if you're going to optimize everything, just do it and assume you're going well. Some people can live with that, some people can't. But we do know, diet is important, exercise is important. There's lots of epigenetic modifiers, sulforaphane, green tea, resveratrol, all the polyphenols, etc. We also know that like smoking, heroin, opioids, they're terrible for your DNA. Terrible, right? So if you look at it and you go, Grandma probably wouldn't want me to eat this, like don't eat it, because that's probably a bad epigenetic modifier.
And you rate all the supplements in your book from 0 to 3 for each of the categories, right?
I do. So the idea before that, or what essentially this started out, is I thought, okay, great. I'd be reading an article, and this was a decade ago, right? And it would say, sirtuin activation, and it would give like 3 examples as the gold standards, blah, 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 blah. And you'd be like, well, how effective is the gold standard? What do we actually know about that, right? So then you'd go back into Google Scholar, or like, I work at a hospital, obviously, so like I get like access to pretty much everything. Although the librarian thinks I'm a nut at this point. She's like, you're an anesthesiologist. You want me to look at like what? But anyway, so the question became, what do these agents do exactly? And how well do they do them? But how do we know it? So it started out as this big giant piece of paper, and I still have it somewhere. It was like checks and minuses. Like, does this actually help you? Check, check, or not really, negative, blah, blah, blah. And I thought checks and minuses are not really going to help me. I turned it into a numerical system. So the idea is that if some agent does absolutely nothing in a particular category, and I read thousands of articles, like if it does nothing, it gets a 0. If there's significant evidence that it does it in a culture or a test tube, it gets a 1. There's significant evidence that there's positive effects in a non-human model, rodents, canines, something similar to us that's not us, it gets a 2. And if there's good evidence in a human, it gets a 3, right? So obviously you want 3s because people go, good human evidence. But just because sometimes there's a lot of 2s, it just means that no one's paid for the studies yet. So I think that there's some really important agents out there that people just don't use because no one's gotten around to testing for it yet. But anyway, but that's the way the system works. So every agent comes with a 7-digit numbers, 10 at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. So it looks a bit like a barcode right now. So when you pick something up, you go, aha, this is great for my epigenetics. Maybe not so good in another category, but at least rather than just saying, I think it's going to be good for me.
I know that you're a very big proponent of red light therapy, and I have this product. I also not supporting it in any way. I just really like the way it looks, and it was one of the best products 2023. So I'm suggesting, because all your books are focused about on supplements, and our listeners can go and read those. But as an example, today we will take a red light therapy and try to rate it so it's more clear how it's organized. So how would you rate red light from standpoint of DNA? Is it helpful, or is it?
So that's a really interesting question. So red infrared light, and it's funny you're doing that because I have 4 of them myself. I've got like the mini one, I've got the giant one. I do have an affiliation with BioLite. I just think they're a tremendous company. They're really good high quality stuff, so I have to give them a shout out. And they just sent me, it's amazing. It's a toothbrush with red infrared light. Yeah, so it vibrates, and it's I love doing it in the dark because like my mouth glows. It's delightful. But so it's hard to rate because it doesn't do the same sort of things that a supplement would do. But what it does do, and I find this intriguing, is that at very specific wavelengths, i.e. the red and the infrared, but they have to be very narrow. So you have to get a good product. The cheap ones don't really work. It actually makes more energy in your mitochondria. This is what it does. In your mitochondria, there's something called the electron transport chain, and it's basically a shuttle system for protons. And it makes what we call ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And the 5th subunit is the ATPase. And it's really cool. It's one of these molecules that like looks like someone actually designed it. It's it's really, so it spins. It has like a bunch of subunits and it
Mhm.
spins. And the faster it spins, the more energy you make. And what's cool about red and infrared light is it makes the spin faster.
Oh,
So, and it lasts, the effect lasts for, I think the half-life is like 4 to 6 hours, something like that. So they say if you're going to do double therapies, like separate it by 8 to 10 hours. Um, but so if you want to make your skin heal better or a joint or this or that, and you're sort of like energy lagging, that's what it does. It just increases energy production.
okay. So talking about energy, 10 and 2 is energy.
Yes.
Yes. What does that mean?
So technically, tenet 2 is mitochondria.
Mhm.
And mitochondria fail in a variety of categories, depending on how specific you want to be. Lowest hanging fruit is an NAD deficiency. Basically, it's pretty well established that by the time you are 40, you are NAD deficient. Then the big question is, well, how do you supplement that? And you can do it one of two ways or both. Number one is you can add NAD via various precursors into your body, or two, you can reduce how much you use in a useless fashion, right? So you can add it back via NMN, which is nicotinamide mononucleotide, or NR, which is nicotinamide riboside. Those are the big ones right now. They're making a liposomal NAD. You can inject NAD, and it has to do with, there's so many like variables as to which one works, right? Which organ you're looking at, when you take them. I mean, there's lots of sort of like whatever. I could talk about that for hours. But then the other option is you take something like Apigenin, which is a CD38 inhibitor. So basically you're breaking down a little bit less, which is actually good because CD38 is very inflammatory. So anyway, point being is that after the age of 40, you need more NAD, lots of ways to do it. That was a long story for no apparent reason. So in your mitochondria, NAD deficiency, failure of your electron transport chain, that's where you really make the energy. Failure of mitochondria. If you look at a cell under a microscope, you'll be like, look, there's, X number of individual mitochondria. So we always count them in the old days. But now we've realized that they sort of bond and come apart, bond and come apart. So it's called fission and fusion. It's a very, very, very active system. So now the sort of the idea is, well, you only really have one mitochondrial system because it all joins together, sort of like Jello. As you get older, they don't fizz and fuse very well. So that's sort of a problem. We also talk about mitochondrial biogenesis, so the making of more when your energy needs go up. That sort of fails as you get older. There's something called the mitochondrial permeability transition pore. It opens and closes when your cells are nice and young, and it's sort of like a pop-off valve for like chemical pressure. And as you get older, it just sort of opens, and when it does, all the crap from the inside of the mitochondria flows out, and your cell's pretty much toast. So you can control that pore. That's good. And then sirtuins 3, 4, 5 live in the mitochondria. They of course fail over time. So there are many ways to skin a cat in terms of mitochondrial optimization. It's sort of like a generic laundry list in no apparent order.
In any way to test? Well, separately for NAD, I haven't really seen any testing because you can try different supplements, but how would I know they actually reach where they need to go?
See, again, an excellent question. So there are a couple companies that measure extracellular NAD, right? How much is floating around in your vasculature? There's no way really they're working on how much it's in your cell. The problem with this is also different cells have different amounts in their cells. If a cell has a high energy requirement, it's going to have more NAD. So like a brain cell is going to have significantly more than the skin cell, as an example. So that's kind of a hard thing to talk about. As well, NAD is circadian, meaning it is produced in a circadian fashion, and it helps circadian cycles keep going. I mean, all these things are very inbred. So if you look at a normal circadian rhythm of NAD, it generally peaks in mid-afternoon, right? And then it goes with, it's a cofactor for sirtuins that turns on your clock BMAL system, blah, 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 blah. But it's really interesting if you read the bottles of these NAD supplement or precursors, it always just says take them in the morning or take them twice a day. And that is honestly garbage. What you need to actually do is take them to time such that their peak is going to be synergistic to the peak that you already have. So I tell people, take it at tea time. I did a big thing in London. I'm like, you guys are going to love this. Take your NAD at tea time. Going to be great, right? If it's oral, it's going to take a little while to get digested, maybe half an hour to an hour before tea time, whatever it is. But it is very important in terms then to get back to your question about testing is a lot of these places say stab your finger, put a blood spot on, send it in, what time much NAD you have. Well, no one has ever asked like what time you're taking the test, right? How old are you? There's so many very important variables. So the answer is if you take a generic test and you want to know if it's going to go up or down, use the same company, do it at the same time, and you'll at least get a base of where you are going. Does that actually mimic real life? Kind of hard to say. I like to tell clients or patients that it's going to take 10 days to 2 weeks, depending on how old you are, to rise out of the deficiency state of NAD, but eventually you will get there, right? And I used to tell people bolus up with an IV and then go to some sort of oral. And I've since decided that that is a terrible idea because the half-life is very short. It can be anywhere from 15 minutes to 15 hours, but it's less than 24 hours. And it has to be because it's circadian. And I'm concerned because NAD gets processed and one of the metabolites is it's just plain old nicotinamide. And it's actually semi-toxic because it has a negative feedback loop to PARPs and sirtuins. So you don't want a monster load of NAD. You just want a healthy, physiologically stable load that's going to vacillate over time. That's probably more than you ever wanted to know about NAD.
Yes. How about mitochondria itself? Any way to test?
It is really hard to test for that. In a cell culture, yes, they can do it. In humans, not so much. Not so much. But again, if you go back to clients and you ask them basic questions, I will tell you that when people come to me, what are your complaints? And generally speaking, and people in their 40s and 50s, they're just tired all the time. Like if work all day at work and come home, they used to be able to go to the gym and now they just can't get off the couch, right? That's energy, right? And the good news is that by optimizing their mitochondria within, 2 weeks to 10 days, roughly, maybe a month, depending on how old they are, these people are like, oh my God, I feel like a kid again. I have energy. And so that's sort of a surrogate test for knowing how well your mitochondria are working. The other really interesting you can do is I believe that a huge amount of menopausal problems or premenopausal problems are mitochondrial derived because oocytes have almost more mitochondria than any other cell. It fluctuates a lot depending on your cycle and if you're ovulating and all that kind of crap. But the mitochondrial failure is a huge proponent of ovarian failure and thus menopause. So if you can optimize your mitochondria, you can theoretically stave off, if not menopause, a lot of these symptoms because maybe your cells aren't going into complete shutdown, maybe just slowing down a whiff. So if I can get to a woman in that stage of life, they tend to do significantly better. And I think it's completely due to mitochondrial optimization.
Right. So self-reporting, you believe, is a reliable source in terms of energy and mitochondria.
No, I do. And I also, so as a physician, I was raised in the Western world of medicine, which isn't always great. But we always say that history, just talking to someone and getting their personal history is more powerful than getting specific labs frequently. Right? So how do you feel? What do you see? What's your skin quality? How is your vision at night? What activities can you do or not do? Right? These are extraordinarily powerful things that people just go, it's aging. But in my world, absolutely not. That's symptomatology. Let's treat it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. In my personal life, in my late 30s, I worked a lot of overtime and I was terribly tired all the time. I just didn't have motivation to do anything else in life. It was just draining. And now I'm gonna turn 50 this year or next year.
Happy
And
birthday.
yeah, thank you. And I feel much, much better. I feel like in my late 20s. I feel like I want to do things, go places, and I believe a lot of that is the fact that I start taking longevity medicine, following your protocol and researching, and I personally feel a huge difference.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, and I'm thrilled for you. And I hear this story sort of over and over and over again because people, unless you do it and you feel it, they don't believe it. But once you have individually felt the difference, it's a game changer.
Yes, definitely. So next one, tenet 3 is cellular pathways and messaging. What does it mean? Is it like a message I get from my boyfriend on my cell phone? What kind of
Yeah.
messaging we're talking about?
Well, it depends on the boyfriend. Right? Some are good, some are bad. So these are pathways, and pathways basically became a cluster of things that starts in terms of, it's in your genes, becomes a protein, and an enzyme affected by the environment, and then affects change further downstream, right? So examples, you have 7 mammalian sirtuins. So sirtuins is sort of like the big first one in this category. And as enzymes, they're called histone deacetylases. What does that mean? It removes specific acetyl groups off of lysines from histones and then a variety of other proteins. But what does it really mean? It means they're on-off switches. So your body perceives things and then turns on various enzymes around your body to affect change. And when you are young, they're all revved up and they're doing great, right? As you get older, your sirtuins fail. Like you don't make as much, they're not as powerful. You also need NAD as a cofactor for sirtuins. So when that drops, you can't activate your sirtuins. And you start seeing absolute failure of cellular homeostasis, meaning your lipid panel starts going out of whack. I hear this all the time. Like I eat exactly the same thing, but now my cholesterol and triglycerides are through the roof. Well, that's because your sirtuins are failing. They also help to control circadian rhythms. The whole like I can't sleep anymore because I'm older. That's sirtuins. Super easy. Abdominal fat distribution. I call it the tire syndrome. Right? All these dudes now they were like so cool and tough and in shape, and now they've got these big bellies. Not only is it beer ingestion, but it's sirtuin deficiency because sirtuins control where you deposit fat, right? It should be under your skin, making you look nice and young and healthy. But as you get older, you look like this, cachectic, skeleton on the top, and your hands are all cachectic, but your belly is full of fat. So fat distribution patterns, that's all sirtuins. So, it can go on and on and on and on. There's 7 mammalian sirtuins, 1, 6, and 7 are in your nucleus, 3, 4, and 5 are in your mitochondria, 2 sort of flits around the cell, but it just controls how your cells are doing. So that's sort of important. So that's category 1 there. Category 2 is something called AMP kinase. So AMP kinase is an enzyme that measures how much energy you don't have, right? So our energy world is the coins that are called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And I don't know if anyone here is an Arrested Development fan. They always say the money's in the banana stand. That was a joke in our family for a while. Here, the energy is in the phosphate bonds. So if you have triphosphate, you have more energy than diphosphate, which is more energy than monophosphate, right? So this enzyme, ATP or AMP kinase, measures how much AMP you have. Basically, it's a measurement of how much energy you do not have, and then sends messages out all over your body saying, we need to fix this. So it looks for energy. So it breaks down glucose, it breaks down fat, looking for energy, and then it turns off stuff that's sucking up too much energy. So you don't build the extra proteins, you don't put the fat in storage, like you don't do all of these things. And in fact, if you activate AMP kinase a lot, it puts you in a state of hibernation, which is actually really good for longevity. Right. So people go on these caloric starvation diets or intermittent fasting, all of those. What you're doing is activating, well, you're doing many things, but one of the key points is you're activating AMP kinase to activate downstream effects of longevity and hibernation. Right.
And I know one of the most popular longevity drugs right now is metformin, right? Is that it's working?
Yeah, so that's one of it. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So we call that it's a caloric restriction mimetic.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of mucks with your mitochondria. It does lots of things, but one of the things it does is it mucks with your mitochondria. It interferes with one of the complexes so that you're not making energy as effectively as you could, right? So your body perceives that as a failure of ATP, so it turns on AMP kinase, which is really helpful. If, however, you are an Olympic athlete or you're going for a personal best, you don't want to be on metformin because all of a sudden, oh my God, you don't have energy, right? So pros and cons. But the good thing about anything that activates AMP kinase is it actually deactivates something called your mTOR pathway. And this is the pathway, young people love this, right? So this is the muscle building pathway. It perceives energy just like the AMP kinase, but it turns things on. This builds muscle, it builds proteins, it builds everything, right? The problem is as you get older, you turn this pathway on, you're trying to build things and your cells just can't do it. And it causes a lot of pathology from cells that are straining to do something that it just cannot do. And this is why rapamycin is so popular, because rapamycin is an mTOR inhibitor, right? And if you give rapamycin to rats, they look great. Their skin looks better, they act younger, they're great. My issue with rapamycin is it affects the ability of cells to turn over more quickly. Hippocampal brain cells where you make memories, intestinal cells, there's a variety of cells that you really, really need fast turnover for, and it just shuts it down because it can't make new proteins. So rapamycin comes with a lot of pros and a lot of cons. And so then people are like, well, I'm just going to take a little tiny speck only on Mondays, right? Great. This is one of those things where I don't think that it's at the moment in my existence, at least, I'm not pro rapamycin. And in fact, it was really interesting because Brian Johnson, that sort of like wackadoodle longevity dude, just came out and said, oh, he's decided not to take rapamycin because he realized that there are side effects. Anyway, so everything that we choose is, pro-con ratio, and I've decided that there are too many cons to shutting down mTOR. But you can partially shut it down with things that activate AMP kinase, and metformin is the perfect example. And I think most people should be on a small dose of metformin, not a huge dose. So there's that.
And any way to test for messaging and see where I am in terms of this tenet? No, there is nothing.
No, I wish there were. Ginfinity for a while was able to test for sirtuin-1, but I think they had some sort of failure of that being able to, I don't know. They can't do it anymore. So I keep pushing people to at least test for sirtuins because I think that's really important. But no. which no. But the last pathway is I think this is a good one because this is the circadian pathway. And what I think people don't truly understand is because if you ever go to a sleep lecture, they talk about, blue lights and don't look at your computer before you go to sleep and make sure the room is dark. And all of those are wonderful things. They're called Zeitgebers, right? This is the external cues to tell your body to sleep or not sleep. But sleep is actually, it's all biochemicals, right? So there's two proteins that put you to sleep. There's two proteins that wake you up. And then there's two proteins that serve as sort of things that increase the vacillation of that or the depth of that. And those are all controlled by sirtuins, controlled by NAD, and a variety of other factors. Of course, as you age, you don't make those proteins either. So, if you can't sleep, and you're doing everything and it still doesn't work, it's because your sirtuins aren't working or you're NAD deficient. So this is another one of those things where you just have to, instead of you can't measure your ROR alpha activity, it just doesn't work. But you can say, well, are you sleeping any better, right? So what I'll do is someone comes to me, we'll go through the pathways, can we optimize your BMAL1, your clock? Selenium actually boosts all of these feedback loops. There's a variety of things that do it. But you sort of have to know what you are doing to make these changes. But sleep, again, you can wear your little Oura ring. It'll tell you how many minutes you've had of REM. But no one actually gives you good sleeping advice other than the whole light business. Except I think longevity physicians, because we focus more on the biophysics or biochemistry of all of it. Anyway, so that's pathways. That's the last pathway.
Yeah. So tenet 4 is DNA repair and quality control.
Yes.
What is included in that one?
So the idea behind this tenet was if your cells are a factory, factories usually run reasonably well, but ultimately things break, right? The equipment can break, the instructions can get lost, and you have to check your widgets, right? This is just the way factories work. So in terms of information getting screwed up, DNA gets screwed up, right? You have 10 to the fifth, up to 10 to the fifth DNA errors per cell per day. That's a lot of zeros. That's a lot of really bad DNA, right? And if you don't fix it, you're going to get disease and cancer. And of course, as you get older, your DNA repair mechanisms fail. So, everyone's always surprised when grandma gets cancer. Well, it was going to happen, right? Because she's not repairing her DNA. And depending on how you count them, there are roughly 5 repair mechanisms. There are 2 for single-stranded, there's Burr, there's Ner, and then there's 2 for double-stranded, homogeneous and non-homogeneous, and then mismatch repair. But the point here is that you can actually upregulate your DNA repair mechanisms, and that will decrease relative risk of disease and cancer and death. So that's kind of important. And then when you look at the actual widgets the cells are making, we talk about, it's all proteins. So people usually call this proteostasis, meaning keeping your proteins in a state of sort of like homeostasis. And this has to do with chaperones. Essentially, any important protein that your body makes, your body's pretty smart. It sends it a babysitter, right? And you think like, oh my God, that's just like twice as much work. But these babysitter proteins are with these important proteins when they are born, and they keep them in shape. And then when they're not working anymore, they take them to the recycle bin. So a lot of these chaperones get triggered by various things, and a lot of them are called heat shock proteins, because if you are warm, the idea is your body perceives heat as destroying your proteins. It says, aha, I'm going to make more protector proteins to keep everything safe. And this is why it's actually good to sit in hot saunas, because you are activating your heat shock proteins, right? So there's some formula, how hot it has to be and how long you have to be in it to sort of maximize this. The good news is that you can also use a variety of pharmaceuticals to also activate your heat shock proteins, which is what I like to do because I'm too lazy to sit in hot tubs frequently. I just don't have time. But anyway, so activating heat shock proteins as well as other chaperones, extremely important to support homeostasis in your protein system. And lastly in this category is I put autophagy. And the reason I do this is because if you can't fix something, your body can choose to recycle the pieces and parts, which is essentially just autophagy is destroying what you've already had and processing it. And you can get rid of all cells or pieces or parts, organelles, individual proteins, whatever it is. But it's all self-eating, right? That's all what autophagy is. And you can upregulate autophagy, and this has been shown to really just help with longevity. And there's a lot of things that can do that, so that's kind of useful.
And any way to test how I'm doing in this category?
No. I'm really sorry. No. This is why everyone comes to me, they're like, should we get a lot of tests before we see you? And I go,
Right.
you can if you want, but like the real ones aren't there. We just don't have them yet.
Mm-hmm.
I wish we did. There's no way I can look at your cell and go, aha, you have 67,000 DNA errors at this moment. Like it's just no way of knowing it, right? But here's what you do. It goes back to family history. So if everyone in your family has a different cancer, let's say mama's kidney cell, someone else has leukemia, someone else has this and that, it's probably because your family is terrible with DNA repair mechanisms, right? Now, if everyone has the same cancer, it's because there's some gene precipitating that cancer, right? But if you're someone that's, in the sun and you've had like 17 basal cell carcinomas taken off of you, well, I'm going to put you on stuff to repair your DNA faster, and maybe next year you'll only have 1 or 2 versus as many as you've had. So we can sort of reduce relative rate of things we can see and count, but other than that, it's kind of hard to tell.
Okay, cancer is the indication. Sounds
Well,
like
because if you think about it, if the biggest sort of way to see DNA damage is looking at your skin, right? When you are in the sun immediately, you burn, or at least I burn because I am pale. You look like
I burned, yeah, I burned
Yeah.
terribly.
Right? So that's your body creating a huge inflammatory reaction and DNA damage, and you're melting your DNA together. That's cyclobutane dimers, and your body has to come along and fix it, right? And if it does, you repair in the standard rate. And if you don't, you start getting skin changes. You get actinic keratosis, you start getting sort of hypertrophied skin. You've seen all of these women with like skin that looks like they've been, out in the sun for 1,000 years. They look like thick leather because their body couldn't fix it the way it should be fixed. So it just became sort of hypertrophied, right? Or they all got millions of little skin cancers. But if you block the DNA damage, number one, right, which we can do, and then two, increase the repair rate, you're going to reduce the relative risk of any skin diseases, at least from the sun.
There are few products on the market right now that by your blood can detect the stage 0 cancer or potential cancer. Do you use those? Do you believe
So
that's...
the answer is yes, right? And this is the shift, as you were saying, from the organ system to the cell system, right? Traditionally, we look for cancer in all of our different organs. We squish our boobs, right, when we had a mammogram, colonoscopy, which is miserable, blah, 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 right? We're looking around for cancers. The new foofy way to do it, and it's not perfect, but it's better, is we do what we call a liquid biopsy. So we just draw your blood, and we know that different cancers put out different biochemical signatures, pieces of DNA, surface markers, all sorts of different things. And we're getting to the point that we can look for them and educatedly tell you percentage risk of what you might have and what you might not have. And they're getting bigger and better. Like Grail, I think, is the first one, and it tests for, I don't know, 20, 30 some cancers. And it tells you this test is, 87% accurate, blah, blah, blah. But, it's like the Horvath clock. That was the first one. And we're getting better and better and better. And I truly believe at some point, we won't have to go get our boobs squished anymore. We'll just go for a liquid biopsy and they'll be like, yeah, you're good. No cancer for another year. Great.
Yeah, because I was just at my doctor a few weeks ago, and she assigned me to do to squish the boobs and do like a colonoscopy. And I also went on the conference and I bought the kit. I haven't done it for the liquid biopsy. So I'm wondering, like, two types of cancer, individual appointment they lost for each versus one appointment, everything tested. It's really like
right.
huge
Seems,
difference.
I know. I think ultimately it's a no-brainer. I think the proceduralists will kill us because they make a lot of money like squishing people's boobs, but it's miserable, right? And at the moment, I don't know what the efficacy is. In no way here can I be on a public forum saying don't go for a mammogram.
Yes,
like
of course, yes.
someone will shoot me for that. At some point in time, and I don't know when that point in time is going to be, but at some point, it will be the standard of care just to go and get blood tests. I think that's the wave of the future. I could be wrong, but it just seems kind of commonsensical when you change from an organ-based idea to a cell-based idea.
Right. Hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah, no kidding, because I've gotten really lazy with my mammograms.
Okay, tenet 5 is immune system, and that's the only tenet that sounds similar to the traditional medicine body system, organ system. So is that the same, or immune system, when we talk about cells, is somehow different?
So excellent question. It's the idea that your immune system at one point protects you and has controlled inflammation, becomes completely rampant over time and breaks into something that we call inflammaging, which is systemic inflammation. Because for some reason, our cells, when you are young, we can fight off a disease. We precipitate, a reaction where we bring in all of our little neutrophils and macrophages, and infection goes away and everything goes poof, and you're back to normal and you're perfect. As you get older, that fails. And you just become systemically inflamed. Like the body doesn't know how to turn itself off. And the inflammatory system, and these are the things that you can measure actually here. Things you can measure. You can measure, so the easiest thing is your CRP. There's the high sensitivity CRP. You can measure interleukins, interleukin 1, 3, 6, are probably the big ones, 12, 10, maybe. You can also measure something called tumor necrosis factor. So we're good at measuring inflammation. And we all have it. And as you get older, you're going to have more and more. And the problem with inflammation is that it destroys tissue. It precipitates all sorts of horrible things, organ breakdown, tissue breakdown. Anything with an itis at the end of it is an inflammatory response, right? So rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, everything. It's just an inflammatory process. So the key here is keeping your immune system intact so that you don't become ill, right? Because obviously grandma is going to get pneumonia, not be able to heal from it because her immune system's not working. As well, she's chronically inflamed. So let's keep our immune system intact and then minimize as much as possible the inflammatory process. So that's that tenet.
Tenet 6 is individual cells.
So
What?
this is the catch-all be-all of recognition that cells are different, right? Briefly mentioned that senescent cells have got to go. These are the zombie cells that people talk about. I talk about them as old grumpy man cells. Because if you think about what they are, you take a normal cell and it undergoes some DNA damage, your body tries to fix it and it can't. So it goes into a state of, first quiescence, where it's just sort of sitting there trying to fix itself, and then senescence. And it is just old and grumpy. It gets fat. The cell morphology actually changes. It gets more mushy on the insides, and it just exudes something called the SASP, which is this is absolutely intense inflammatory system, like all these cytokinins, chemokines, etc. And so not only is that cell bad, but it affects cells around it. So we call that a paracrine problem. So the cell next to it may have been perfectly happy and normal, but now it's being sort of poisoned by the cell next to it. And then that one becomes senescent. So once you have one or a couple, it's sort of this exponential growth to have more and more senescent cells, which leads to bad tissue, leads to more inflammation, blah, blah, blah. And then you're back to where you started with the inflammation, right? So the key here, anyway, so my grumpy old man idea is just the fact that you've got like, used to be a normal employee. He's been there for far too long. Now he's sitting in the factory somewhere. He's old, he's fat, he's grumpy, spewing out negativity, et cetera, and just causing everyone to be in a bad mood. So that's my grumpy old man thing.
So how do we fire him?
Well, that's the question, right? You got to shoot him in the head. That's terrible. I should say that. But senescent cells have to go. And so we are working on strategies to get rid of them. The most sort of common at the time is a combination of something called quercetin and dasatinib. And some people pronounce it differently. It's danacitab, dasatinib, doesn't really matter. It's actually a chemotherapy agent for CML, type of leukemia. We're not saying take it all the time, but you take it in sort of pulsed doses to get rid of senescent cells. Unfortunately, all senescent cells are not the same. So I like to rotate my senescent cell therapies. So I'll use that combination. I'll use roxithromycin. I'll use fisetin's a good one. The idea is keep that number under control. And we can't measure that either, so good luck. However, if people have areas of pathology, so when they come to me, like, does anything hurt? Oh, I've had the same knee injury for 20 years, it kills me. That's an area of senescent cells. Or if someone had, radiation therapy for whatever reason, that is just laden with senescent cells, and we got to get rid of those bastards. So again, there's just probability. As well, the older you get, the more you're going to have. So you have to be sort of semi-aggressive about getting rid of them. The running joke I have with a few folks in the longevity world is if you take an old person and you get rid of their senescent cells, they're just going to go poof, because they don't have any normal cells left, right? You'll have the stack of crumbs sitting there going, yeah, that didn't really work out as planned. So you need to get rid of them in a controlled but slowly, semi-aggressive fashion, depending on age and pathology.
And fasting helps? Do you fast? Do you believe in that?
I believe in fasting. I think it's fantastic. I just can't do it to save my life. I'm a terrible faster. I'm the Snickers commercial where I'm just a raving bitch lunatic. So I can't do it. But I take 12 pharmaceuticals to make up for the fact that I can't fast.
Okay.
You're like, that's not
Sounds good. Well, we need alternative for people, right? Everybody's different. Okay, tenet 7 is a cellular waste management.
Yes. So this one's actually really key. So number one, it's garbage you can't get rid of, which is called lipofuscin. So when cells undergo autophagy or they're sort of recycling pieces and parts, there's frequently a glob that they just can't break down. And so cells do what we all do is we hide it in the back of our cells and pretend it's not there. I call it the kitchen drawer phenomenon. Like the longer you have been in your house, there's always a drawer in the kitchen full of crap, right? You
Yes,
just,
yes, I have one.
right? Yeah, right. You just don't know what to do with it, right? So that's lipofuscin. And the problem is if cells turn over reasonably quickly, like a few months or even a few years, right? Your body's going to be like, well, I'm going to get rid of the cell, so you dump the lipofuscin. But in cells that don't turn over, like brain cells, this is an important one, they're just full of this crap. And they've looked at brains of really old people, and they're just half of their brains is lipofuscin. And you're like, how could you possibly have brain function with any of that? You can't. So one of the keys is sort of to limit or try to eradicate lipofuscin. So that's thing one in this category. And then the other really huge one is glucose. Because glucose, as we all know, is number one, it's inflammatory, but number two, it is sticky. My stupid analogies. It sticks on the outside like a lollipop would stick to your shirt. It sticks to your stuff on the inside, right? And it destroys tissues. And it breaks into pieces and parts called AGEs, advanced glycation end products. And these are very toxic. They're inflammatory. They ruin tissues. They cause things to cross-link that shouldn't be cross-linked. And so the idea is, in this category, is how do you defeat glycation? So it's about limiting absorption of glucose, changing how you process glucose, trying to block AGE production, trying to get rid of AGEs. I have a very ornate 7-step process to block glycation, which, because I'm a sort of renowned junk food junkie. So I don't recommend that people eat the garbage that I eat. Because if you do, then you sort of have to go down the pathway of taking, again, so many silly pharmaceuticals and such. But anyway, point being is that category, it's because glucose is necessary, but it also creates waste products.
And is overweight, is that indication of waste management system not working or failing, or color of the skin, or there's probably no test for it, but any other indicators we can use to say, yeah, that person needs more focus on waste management?
Oh, sure. Actually, this one's actually good because the big problem here is diabetes. This is the inability to control glucose. The good news is we can test for diabetes. So you can get your resting glucose levels. You can get your hemoglobin A1C tested. So hemoglobin A1C is actually really interesting. What it is it is your hemoglobin that glucose is now stuck to, right? Glucose sticks to all of your organs. We could theoretically take a piece of any of you, a pancreas, a liver, this, and like go, how much glucose is stuck to it? But that's really not very healthy. So we can take it out of your blood and we can look at your hemoglobin and your red cells and say how much glucose is stuck to this, and we can measure it. So if you were diabetic, it's probably 6, 7, 8, 9. So I had someone with like 16 the other day. But oh my God, they just look like they were going to crack when you touch them because they're just like full of sugar. But you want, a hemoglobin around 5, right? 4.8 is great, 5, 5.1, 5.2. Higher than that is still considered normal for normal people. In longevity worlds, we want it a little bit lower. So that's absolutely testable. The other thing that's kind of fun is there's a scanner. It's an AGE reader. It's out of the Netherlands. I forget what the company is, but you just there's 2 models. There's one that you can just stick on your skin as this little round thing. It goes boop, 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 and it tells you how much AGE accumulation you have in your skin. Or there's a big one and you stick your arm in it and it sort of tells you how you're doing. So those things are testable. Most people don't, but they are testable.
Oh, wow, great. Okay, and so what's the best strategy to do the waste management? Is it like the supplements, or is there anything else, like again, infrared sauna, sweating, exercising?
Good question. The easiest way is to just not eat glucose. But if you are going to, then we just sort of need to eradicate it piecemeal. Easy things. There are a few supplements over the counter that decrease the absorption of glucose into your body. A few supplements that you can sort of like dump it out faster.
Mhm.
few supplements that can sort of muck with the AGE production. So depending on how aggressive one wants to be, there are many things you can do in this category. But unfortunately, sort of nothing outside of your body is going to help with this.
Um, well, to summarize, I want to ask, your first book was published in 2017, and the second was published in 2022. But longevity field are evolving very quickly. Would you do it any differently? Would you still structure it the same way? Or
No, I'm still structuring it the same way. I'm working on book 3 and 4 as we
oh,
speak.
great.
And the reason I'm doing two jointly is number one, you're right, it's moving so quickly. It is absolutely. And when I wrote the first book, the idea was, who the hell is going to read it? Like, I had no idea. I had no idea.
I
So,
read it twice, so people
well,
read
thank
it.
you. Thanks. So, you know, and it turns out, yeah, people are reading it, right? But I had no idea. And I couldn't get a publisher because they're like, what's anti-aging? What's longevity medicine? Like, they thought I was making this crap up. So, you know, if, as you well know, there's regular prose in it. And then there's stuff in italics that has like more sciencey stuff. And then there's a lot of really bad jokes in it to try to keep people entertained as they sort of fight through the science. Because I didn't know who the audience was going to be. I had no idea. And it has become clear since then that I have two audiences. There's one audience that wants to know, but they have no blooming idea, about science, but they still want to know, right? And then there's people who really want the hardcore information. So now I have an agent and she wants me to sort of like create a book for the masses. So the book for the masses will be sort of like, I don't want to say watered down, but it'll be a more simplistic, analogy based, this is what it is sort of book. At the same time, there'll be the one that comes out that says, yeah, this is the real shit. This is the science that, if you really want to know, this is
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
So I'm writing it in tandem so that it's sort of easier to sort of swallow.
Mhm.
But there's a ton of more stuff coming out. It's so unbelievably interesting. But I'm sticking to the main sort of system because I think it works.
I agree. I love it. I think it's great. So my next question, you mostly focusing about supplements within your books, but can the Kaufman protocol be applied to exercise, food, hygiene, or lifestyle at large?
Oh,
Oh.
absolutely. At some point, I rated exercise. And it's
Mhm.
incredibly good for you. And it turned out there was a big difference between like resistance or muscle building and aerobic. They just did different things for you. Like, for example, resistance, amazingly good for muscle, bone quality, cardiovascular, clearly different, for your cardiovascular system, circulation health, and that sort of thing. So, yes, I rated them. I don't remember where the numbers are, but yes, they've been rated and clearly they're good for you. Diet is tougher because eating one apple versus eating 12 apples is extremely different, right? Versus a Twinkie, which is clearly not so great for you. Food, so that's really hard. But I do love the gizmos and gadgets these days. Haven't rated them per se, but I'm still digging them. I have a Catalyst suit that I use every few days. I just got a bod stim suit, which I'm dying to try. These are all sort of like electricity driven, fry your bodies, hope for the best kind of things. And I shouldn't say that in a negative fashion. The Botstim suit is supposed to be you wear it for an hour as you're walking around in your home doing your sort of stuff, and it zaps you in like interesting patterns based on frequency and length and all that sort of thing. It's supposed to release like follistatin and clotho and that sort of thing out of your protein, out of your muscle system. So I'm trying that, which will be kind of fun. Obviously the Catalyst is just for generic muscle building, but man, it is effective. It really works. And then I have, like, as you said, 4 red infrared light things sitting around, and my new toothbrush, which I'm very excited about. I've got little gizmos and gadgets that put out different electrical signals, and they sort of change mood and change all sorts of things. My PEMF mat is a active thing that I use all the time. So I haven't rated them per se, but I definitely think that they are important. And I consider them sort of tier 1 on my longevity pyramid. So things that you need to do every day, right? Supplements, medications, light therapies, that's that whole family of things. And then on top of that, you layer the peptides. And then I believe in once a month exosome therapy. And, so supplements are fantastic, meds are fantastic, but it's pieces of a puzzle. It's certainly not the end all be all.
Mhm. Anything else you practice like daily or weekly? What is part of your longevity routine besides supplements and
Well,
red light?
I try to do, gosh, I travel a lot, so time is tough. But I try to exercise every day. I try to eat reasonably well, with the exception of my donut habit. Definitely the supplements, definitely the medications. Try to do red light every night. Try to do some stretching every night. Once a week, I always get a full body massage because I think it increases it feels great. I mean, let's face it. But it also increases circulation to your muscles, to your skin, right? So that's nice and healthy. And then I'm obsessed with exosomes at the moment. I think I've given them to you, right?
Yes, yes, couple times. Do you do it every month, once a month
Every
yourself?
every month I do exosome therapies. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Put them in my face. I put them in my joints when my joints hurt from rock climbing. And I do an IV on myself every month. And then I'll throw in whatever's sitting around. So I'll throw in some vitamin C or some glutathione or this or that or the other. But beyond that, ultimately I want to get into some plasmapheresis, but haven't done that quite yet. I'm not a big proponent of the stem cell therapies because it kind of wigs me out, the idea of putting someone else's DNA into me on a regular basis. I'm just not a big fan of that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so many options and so many different therapies. Some people are pro hyperbarics. I'm actually more pro hypobarics. I think water filtration systems are sort of important to keep the plastics out. Microplastics are a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
Air quality is huge. I constantly have air filters going on. My neighbors in my condo are pot addicts. And so if my filters are on, not only am I stoned, but it just, keeps me, air quality is increasingly important. It goes into your body. It's very, very important. And I've started wearing silly blue light glasses as much as possible when I can remember to do it. But there's so many little things to do. That number one, you start feeling a little bit nuts, but number two, when you don't do it, you sort of feel a little bit lazy. So I'm trying to build all of the good habits and then sort of preach them for other longevity folks.
Well, you mentioned that you're working on two new books. What is next for you? What else are you working on? What are your plans for Kaufman Institute and the Kaufman Protocol?
Oh gosh. So beyond the books, my other big project that I'm trying to undertake is that it drives me absolutely nuts when I say, you should take Agent X, whatever it is. And they go, what brand should I take? And I go, oh my God, so hard to know. Right. So I am figuring out, I'm trying to create an algorithm or a rating system for the actual companies and supplements. Where do they source their product? Are they certified? Are they inspected? Are there inspections available on the website? Is it a mom and pop shop? Do they make one thing really, really well? Or do they make 77 of them like not so well? Right. So I really want to be able to rate things and give people really good guidance and advice. Because if we're going to spend so much time and money and energy putting the quality things into our bodies, we should have a better idea of who's good and who's not. So that is like incredibly time consuming right now, but that's what I'm working on.
That's a big one. That's great. Well, we passed 1 hour. I don't want to take any more of your time.
Oh, you are so sweet. I bet it's my favorite subject, and you are lovely.
Well, but thank you so much. That was a pleasure. I think we covered so much and it was a great. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, and maybe you'll have me back. This is fun.
Absolutely. Yes. Maybe once your books come out, we will do it again and talk about the new books. That was Kaufman Protocol with Dr. Sandra Kaufmann. I hope you really enjoyed this. If you did, please like my video. And if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comment box below. I'll try to make sure me and Sandra would respond to the comments. And also, if you like this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, WELLROOM, for more videos like this. Thank you for watching.